Well, I've got my Diet Coke and I've got my Whisper. So let's predict an election, shall we?
A candidate for Prime Minister, constantly building a relationship of trust with the public.
That wasn't my question.
Word to your mother, it's me, Dr. Macclevoid. It's not my real name, obviously. This is another edition, a bonus edition of Dr. Macclevoid's Nude Politics, an election prediction video. You weren't expecting this one, were you? I was going to reserve comment until after the election, but then I thought, well, there's nothing quite like the build-up to the vote, is there? It's election eve, and therefore I think we get a sense of how things are going. It's time that we can make a prediction, and we almost certainly can't be wrong, can we? Worth a trip to the bookies? I should think so. It's been a zany election full of scandal and stupidity and Ed Davey, and it's been extraordinary, hasn't it, in so many ways. And when I say extraordinary, I mean extraordinarily empty in terms of substance and intelligent, mature, politically educated debate on the issues of the day. But no matter, you're not politically educated. You don't give a sod, do you? You don't pay any attention to politics outside of election cycles. You're probably only vaguely aware there is a general election on Thursday. So, what do you care, right? They're all the same, aren't they? Except they're not. And the result of Thursday's election will be very serious indeed. It will have a profound impact on the country's future direction, your prospects, and what kind of nation we turn out to be. But don't let that encourage you to make a last minute drive to cram up on the facts and read all the party manifestos. Not that they'll tell you much. It's more about what they don't say than what they do say. To find out who the hell your local candidate is and what they stand for, or indeed to brush up on the last 40 to 100 years of British electoral history, so you can put add some context to whatever the hell it is you're thinking. It's too late for that now, so just listen to me, and we'll try to get through the last moments of this election campaign together. I'm not going to really talk about the campaign. Watch the previous video in this series if you're interested in my comments on that. This is more about what's likely to happen on Thursday and why. Let me start by saying I have no idea what the result's going to be. Yeah, no, I think it's been a bit of a waste of time, hasn't it? You could have been watching Pornhub or something. Okay, alright. I'll rephrase. There are too many undecideds to know. All the polls, of course, and some of them very detailed polls. These MVP, these mega polls that purport to use time travel and fucking AI and God knows what else to predict the behaviour of every zombie-like voter in every constituency. All of those polls point to a significant Labour majority. Some say 250, which of course would be an historic result. It would be Labour's largest ever majority, the largest parliamentary majority of modern times. It would eclipse the Liberal majority of 1906. It would smash the Labour majorities of 1945 and 1997. It would be absolutely unprecedented, and all the more remarkable in the modern age for rewarding the party that put the least televisual leader forward in the form of Sir Keir Starmer. A man who, let's face it, was not built and designed for the media age. But his sheer blandness, his sheer lack of charisma, his kind of managerial shtick might be very attractive to people at the moment. Because we've had 14 calamitous, wild years of sort of Oxford Union, yarboo, sucks to you, trousers down politics, haven't we? And because we've had all of that, we're desperate, are we not, for just boring, middle-of-the-road competence. There's no guarantee we'll get it, you understand? But Starmer exudes that, doesn't he? And that might make him attractive, particularly to those precious Middle England voters who are also very worried about their mortgages. And, occasionally their kids and the next generation. But mainly their mortgages. So, it's been suggested that there might be an unusually high number of undecideds in this election. 2.5 million. Which is historically very, very high indeed. Usually it would be about half that. So, 2.5 million people still don't know how they're going to vote on Thursday. I'm recording this on Tuesday evening. Excusez-moi. 2.5 million of you don't know. What the fuck are you waiting for? You're just going to check in on Wednesday night to see whether or not Starmer's been outed as the most prolific serial killer and sex offender in Britain's history? You don't know by now? You must know what your values are, what your ideas are, how damaged a human being you are. You must know how much you hate other people or how much you love them. So surely to God you've got some idea about what you're going to do. 14 years of Tory government, you must know surely whether you think they've done a good job or a bad job. It's not for me to say, of course. This is a politically neutral series. I'm not going to tell you what to think. You might think Rishi's going to lose. And the polls would back you up. And you might think he deserves to lose because he's a technocratic ignoramus. And you might believe that the Conservatives have been selfish beyond reason and cat-handed in their governance of the country to a profound and unprecedented degree. And you might believe that every person who's voted for Conservative governments in 2010, 2015, 2017 and 2019 are responsible and should feel shame of the catastrophe they've wrought on this country. You might think that, but it's not for me to say whether that's correct or not. I recall in 2010, in the run-up to that election, having a discussion with a doctor, a heart surgeon, no less, who told me that she was going to vote Conservative because, well, David Cameron, yes, he seems okay. I believe him when he says the NHS are his priorities and that he's going to be good with the NHS. So you see, it's not just Joe fucking Blogs and Johnny Bollocks down the cock and balls that you've got to look out for. There are so-called intelligent people out there too, who politically have about as much knowledge as this fucking Airwick canister. You will recall the Conservatives reorganised and in part privatised the National Health Service within a year of coming into office. Andrew Rawnsley's top-down reorganisation of the National Health Service that opened the door to a great deal more private provision. The NHS in 2010 was well funded, of course, and had the highest approval ratings in its entire history. But Some people in the NHS thought the Conservatives would do a better job with it. It doesn't matter what you do in life. It doesn't matter how educated you are. If you're not politically educated, you shouldn't be voting on Thursday. I've said this before and I'll say it again. I know some people who think compulsory voting's a good idea. No. If you don't know the basics of British politics, if you don't understand the history of the parties that you're voting for, and therefore what's behind those people ideologically, then you have no business casting a ballot on Thursday. Stay at home. Watch Tipping Point. Jerk off. Do whatever you normally do. Don't go and vote. Only vote, for God's sake, if you've given it some real thought and consideration. It's too important for the fucking amateurs to dilute the result with their stupidity. Stay at home. But there are 2.5 million of you who don't know which way you're going to go. That scares the piss out of me. You really don't know? But that's a lot of voters, and that means whatever the polls tell us. Remember, the polls only tell us how the declared, how the decided intend to vote, or how they say they intend to vote. We cannot be certain they will vote that way. If you add 2.5 million people to that changes the result quite dramatically. Not for nothing, in today's times is there a story that Rishi Sunak, poor old Rishi, in his death throes, is now targeting everything at about 1% of the electorate. These are people who have switched to Reform UK, also known as Refuck for short, because that's what they intend to do, refuck the UK, take us back to a country that never existed, and thereby ensuring the future can never be born. Rishi's targeting this 1% of voters because if he can get 200,000 of them, let's say, to vote Conservative instead of for Farage, then that changes dramatically the number of seats the Labour Party win. Because it means the Conservatives can hold on in many more seats, thereby cutting that all-important Labour majority, diluting that Labour mandate, making the Labour Party cautious and scared of its own shadow, so it's terrified to enact any radical policies. In other words, terrified to rip up the Thatcherite consensus, terrified to change anything substantially, which will make it nice and easy for a future Conservative government to come in and change everything back. Just like in 2010. But Rishi, even though he's going for the 1%, still hasn't factored in the 2.5 million who haven't decided. You know, those are the viewers, the voters he knows about. It's the 2.5 million he can't be sure of that will decide. Now, hopefully, they will have seen and they will have heard and they will have decided that maybe, just maybe, it's worth going to the polling station and making their voice heard. It's not for me to say which way they should vote, of course, and you might think you'd have to be degenerate and senseless to vote for a 5th Conservative term, but I'm not saying that. And you might think that if you vote for Reform UK, refuck, you're voting basically for a rebranded UKIP, even though the old UKIP still exists in a much reduced form. But you're voting for the same old band of disaffected Jim Davidson fans who, frankly, don't have any real political ideas apart from let's make everything the way it fucking was. Back in 1935. Presumably they want to reintroduce fucking rationing as well. These morons, these fools are asking for your vote. But that's okay, because under the first past the post system, there's a very good chance they will cleave that Tory vote, create what's called a right-wing schism. And isn't it nice to see it on the right for a change instead of the left, you might think? And guarantee Labour victory, but as we've discussed, the scale of that victory cannot yet be determined. Another factor that might impact on the result, the Liberal Democrats. Remember them? They've had a very good campaign, as we've discussed in the last episode. Very joyful and bouncy and full of fun and games. Old Ed Davies been bungee jumping and paddle boarding and water sliding, and he landed on the lunar surface on Monday. If you want the moon, vote Liberal Democrat. Cost the Liberal Democrats billions of pounds to get him up there, but he went. Spent a few hours on the moon, left a Liberal Democrat winning here diamond stuck onto the lunar surface for all time. Now, poll-wise, the Lib Dems haven't really moved very much. They floated somewhere between 12 and 15%. But the irony is that under first past the post, a system we all say we dislike until it gives us the result that somehow we all want. And when I say all want, I mean broadly reflects the nation's feelings in a way that, you know, political emotion and feeling are quite exaggerated, and so perhaps it's appropriate we have a political voting system that exaggerates our intent, or rather takes our vote and blows it up to give governments huge majorities, you know. 70% of the seats, 40% of the vote. But this isn't a video about the electoral system or the pluses and minuses or whatever. But please, don't, you know, if you're a PR person, don't, I trust you won't be crying into your cereal, will you, on Friday morning if you wake up and discover that George Galloway's won no seats, and Nigel's the only refuck MP, and poor sod's got to spend the next 5 years in Clacton pretending that he's got a purpose. You're not really going to blub, are you? Of course, if that does happen, I'm sure Nigel will attempt to flip to the Tories and become their leader, because, of course, as we discussed previously, he has no interest whatsoever in refuck as a political project. He is the political project, just as Galloway is the political project for the Workers' Party of Great Britain, or so called. Those Putin apologists, you might think. Politically neutral show, I have no view of my own. So, the Lib Dems could do really well. Some polls have them as Her Majesty's official opposition. Ooh, what would that be like? What be the consequences of that? Well, for one thing, it would transform the way we look at the Liberal Democrats. In modern times, we've only known them to be either the third party or a fringe party, or those bastards that enabled the Tories in 2010. If that's what you believe, you might think that they helped to moderate the Conservatives and therefore positive influence on the coalition. It's not for me to say. But what we've never had in the modern era, not during the period where any of us have been alive, is the Liberals as the bona fide official opposition to the government. With all of that attention and all of that legitimacy. And in the modern era, of course, all that media exposure. It's impossible to overestimate what a catastrophe it would be for the Conservatives to be relegated to third place. Because it would essentially end them as a serious political organisation, at least for the next 5 years. Reduced to 2 questions at Prime Minister's questions. No more privy councillors. No more influence. No more airtime. And that means, of course, the Liberal Democrats would have quite a platform, would they not, in order to advance their own agenda as a legitimate opposition to a government which is ostensibly left-wing, but all Labour governments tack to the right in office for the most part. So it could be that you have a slightly right-of-centre government against a bona fide and unapologetic social democratic left-of-centre opposition. And that would be transformative, wouldn't it? It would change the whole tone of British politics. And indeed, would change the narrative in terms of what could be discussed. Because one thing the Lib Dems would feel emboldened to talk about, of course, would be Europe. And one imagines they would adopt a policy of single market membership, or maybe even rejoining the EU. But it's not for me to say if that would be a good or a bad thing. So, it matters how badly the Tories do. It matters how well the Labour Party do. The Labour Party scrape in, then they're going to be a timid, scared little government, frightened to do too much. They campaigned in that way. They campaigned as a government that expected to do modestly well, have a majority of 20 or something. And you might think they would deserve it if that's what happened. But if that's what they get, then any radical change is off the agenda. The Labour Party aren't like the Conservative Party. They're not shameless and audacious like the Tories. The Tories were prepared to shake up Britain as a minority government if necessary in 2010. David Cameron greedily saw the Liberal Democrats and he said, they're going to be my human shield. I'm going to take them. I'm going to cross their palms with silver in terms of getting them into government. And once they're there, I'm going to do everything I would have done anyway. Now, he didn't have it all his own way for 5 years, but he had it 70-80% his own way. He used the Lib Dems, the poor naive sods. But he had the balls to do that because the Tories have that sense of entitlement. They're the natural party of government. They saw 2010 as a restoration. The king's back on the throne after 13 barren years with Oliver Cromwell and his joyless cronies. Christmas is back. You know, that's how the Tories see themselves. Labour have what do you call it? Imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome. They don't really believe that they're natural born rulers any more than you do. And so they're always timid, and they're always a little bit, should we? We don't want to upset Middle England. If they have a majority of 20, they're going to be frightened to rock the boat too much. It's all going to be steady as she goes. But if you give them a majority of 200, well, that's different, isn't it? 200 with the Lib Dems as the official opposition, that would be very interesting in terms of what suddenly went on the policy agenda. Because if you don't even need to be too concerned that the Conservatives will be the opposition next time round, let alone the alternative government, got a bit of a free hand there. And Starmer might just listen to those people whispering in his ear who say, it's now or never. Run with it. There will never be a better time. But that depends on you and what you do, doesn't it? Will it be glad, confident morning in Britain on Friday? Or glad, confident morning? See what I've done there? It's up to you, as always, as it should be. But don't vote the wrong way. I mean it. I will slap you, silly. There's a lot at stake in this election. I say to each and every one of you, go out and vote. Consider your vote. Think carefully. Think carefully about the country as it is and how you prefer it to be. It's not for me to tell you who to vote for, but I don't think you can go far wrong if you vote in the societal interest rather than your own. Because look what voting in your own interest has done for everybody else's prospects and everybody else's dreams. Can you really say it's been a roaring success? So, Labour majority, sure. But the size of that majority will be very significant indeed. I don't think Rishi Sunak will succeed in flipping enough refuckers at this stage to stave off a Labour majority of size. But there is that possibility that a few people will say that's a foregone conclusion and won't bother to vote at all. It's not like 1997 where people thought, oh, Labour will win, but the Tories always win, don't they? They won in 1992, for God's sake. So we better go out and vote just in case, because you know what those sneaky bastards are like. They'll just scrape in. You know, I remember sitting in a cafe in Brockley Cross in April 1997 reading that Labour will get a majority, but I still think, you know, it will be a small majority. Whoever the columnist was, I can't remember who they were now. That conditions voters to act a certain way, that sort of talk. But we're in different territory now, aren't we? We all expect Labour to win and win big. Will that stop a significant number of people voting Labour or turning up to the polling station? Because it's all right, they've got it covered. As we've discussed, there's a massive difference between a Labour majority of 30 or 250. Massive difference in terms of what they feel emboldened and able to do. Rishi Sunak, when he talks about surrendering to Labour, giving up your future to Labour, he's articulating the fear that people like him have of unchecked Labour power. Of course, it isn't healthy for a government to win too big, but he's also acknowledging that Labour, with a big majority, have got a mandate to do big things. And if you've got to this point and you don't think it's time for big things, well, you know, maybe it's time you got back to your mule. This has been Dr. Macclevoid's Nude Politics, the studiously politically neutral segment on the internets. I'll be back after the election to discuss what actually happened. What did you do? What it all means. Until then, vote well. Vote with a clear conscience. Goodbye.